It has been pretty amazing how much the spirit of the age has been embraced by the bishops, and there is no greater cheerleader for the spirit of the age than Caesar, regardless of which particular Caesar we are talking about. Caesar is not an individual man, or it's more of an office that is held by numerous men, but it can also refer to a singular person. Today I use the term in reference to the Holy Land, where we saw the annual celebration of the lighting of the Christmas tree, all but ended by Caesar. The timing of this being made known in the rest of the world happened to coincide with the feast of St. Nicholas, which I personally found to be particularly appropriate. And no, not for any reasons having to do with secular depictions of St. Nicholas as a cookie-munching, milk-swilling soda advertisement that visits you by coming down your chimney on Christmas Eve. St. Nicholas was a stalwart defender of the faith, one of the great saints of the era of the Church Fathers, whose legacy is so widely known today because both of his heroic charity that helped inspire the Santa myth, as well as for his, shall we say, Rocky Balboa-esque handling of Arius, who himself is a good representation of the spirit of the age, then and frankly now in our own time. This Christmas tree ceremony story isn't limited to the Holy Land either. Let's have a look because it is to be expected that there are more examples of similar stories here than you might expect. First, to the city of Bethlehem we go. Every year, the Christmas tree lighting ceremony is one of the largest events in the city of Bethlehem, the city where, as I am sure you know, Christ was born. In years past, the ceremony is one of the biggest draws in the region, with thousands participating. The Catholic Church traditionally works with local officials to coordinate the event, which is one of the great and rather simple efforts to bring peace and unity by bringing attention to the birth and life of Christ. There is even a priest whose job it is to officially help with this process for the Vatican. The annual event is coordinated in this way, with some of the details being worked out by the Church and others by local officials. It's the kind of traditional leadership we like to see from the Church when it interacts with the secular world. But this year has, of course, been different. This past weekend, the tree lighting ceremony went off as usual, thanks be to God, but Caesar decided that it would be a private ceremony, with few in attendance, and those who did were mostly officials. What did the Church say? Not much, if anything. Another offering made by the Church to the spirit of the world, a spirit that, for my money, was released in 2019 on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, October 4th, in the Vatican Gardens with the enthronement of Pachamama. I've covered that elsewhere, but since that event, the Church has found itself in a position where Church officials feel the need to render unto Caesar that which belongs to God. And 14 months later, we see the Christmas being rendered unto Caesar himself. Another example of this comes from the actual historic home of Caesar, Rome, where midnight mass is no longer happening. Why? Because Caesar said so. December 21st, in fact, to January 6th, 2021, the Feast of the Epiphany, Caesar has said that no one may visit outside their own towns, at all. The pilgrimages that happened in the Catholic world at that time are now functionally over. Why? How does this happen? Because the bishops have embraced the zeitgeist. The spirit of the age of Caesar has taken hold of the Church, and make no mistake, we live in the age of Caesar. When the windows of the Church were open to the world back in 1962, a fetid fog entered, and as a consequence, since that time, the bishops have been working closely with Caesar on his program, and have come to rely on Caesar for his silver coins. The end result is Caesar overreaching and telling the Church that the most sacred observances are not possible. You would think that someone, anyone, in the Church would speak up, and to be fair, a few bishops have, but the most important ones, including the Pope, have said virtually nothing. In fact, they have aided in this. As I mentioned earlier, Vatican City already decided against holding traditional Christmas liturgies that could be attended. Instead, you can attend a papal mass and the traditional Urbi et Orbi of Christmas by watching the mass online. Personally wasn't aware that blessings received online were considered liturgically valid, but we do live in interesting times. When this sort of thing has become so regular that we barely blink when it happens, we should ask ourselves how, in what way, we helped make this a reality. Were we so distracted by the drama surrounding Caesar that when our sacraments suddenly disappeared, when our masses went away, on our sacred traditions that help us to honor the Lord in a way that is truly right and just, and even the secular expressions that we all fully admit are lacking, but still are at least have at their core something that is right ordered. But when those all went away, and with barely a word said, we have to ask how that happened. I'm reminded of the central message of John Paul II, and if you've been subscribed for a long time, you know that I'm personally not exactly a fan of John Paul II. But his central message was beautiful. He told us to have courage. That is a message I would love to hear from the Pope today. One wonders if the faithful have forgotten that message already. It is a truly right-ordered message. In fact, it's a message for our time. We are to have courage because Christ has already been victorious. But it is a message lost on many today. At the most basic level, it means to not embrace the spirit of the age. The Catholics are to be Catholics. It's hard for many to hear in this strange time we live in, but it is a message that we need to hear again. If your bishop is a participant in this trend of embracing the zeitgeist, and statistically, he probably is, I will remind you of something. Last Sunday was the feast of St. Nicholas. Matt brought him up at the beginning. We know what the stories tell us of St. Nicholas and his interaction with Arius. Perhaps we need another bishop who will embrace the spirit of Nicholas and stand up for the truths of the faith and all that is decent and approach his brother bishops with the same fervor and fire that Nicholas did in his time. Arius was a bishop, after all. This happened all those centuries ago, but I like some others recently, will say that perhaps St. Nicholas needs to be invoked now, both in spirit and in reality. This is much more than just a Christmas tree lighting ceremony. This is about Christmas. This is about the bishops rejecting the spirit of the age, getting them to connect with the courage that comes from Christ, embodied in the Catholics of ages past who stood for all that is right and did so in what must have been much harder circumstances than what we would face today, at least overtly. But the spirit of the age has entered the church, welcomed in when the windows of the church were opened to the world again in the 1960s. One consequence of that is that the bishops now stand in partnership with Caesar, and as a consequence have discovered that such partnerships are rarely partnerships at all in the modern world, that in many ways the church now relies on the charity of Caesar to operate. This isn't Christendom we're talking about here. Thus, when the Christmas Mass is questioned, the simple but otherwise right-ordered secular traditions that Catholics are free to embrace like public expressions of this season, when those are called into question, we see the bishops sitting idly by while it happens, at best, and at worst, participating in Caesar trying to render unto himself what belongs rightfully to God. It is a long time since for the better bishops to be inspired by the example of St. Nicholas and to act accordingly, maybe literally. What do you think of all this? I'm not sure what to think personally beside what I've said here, aside from the spirit of the age being in the church to such an extent that at times the city of God looks so much like the city of man that they can't be distinguished anymore. And I do wonder, I've spoken in the past about the ape of the church, and I kind of wonder if that is what is at the heart of this. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments, please. And please pray for the church. Thank you for listening. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.